The dismissal came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered with the cold precision of a blade between the ribs. "You are no longer required in this household, Miss Hartley." Mrs. Pemberton's voice carried across the drawing room like the crack of winter ice. She did not look up from her embroidery, as though Eleanor's presence, her very existence, merited no more attention than a servant come to empty the chamber pots. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her hands clasped before her worn muslin gown. 24 years of life had taught her to absorb humiliation without flinching, to accept cruelty as one might accept rain. "May I inquire as to the reason, ma'am?" "You may not." The needle continued its methodical path through fabric. "You will leave before supper, without references." The words settled over Eleanor like a shroud. Without references, no respectable family would employ her. Without employment, she had nothing. No income, no shelter, no future except the workhouse or worse. She knew the reason, of course. 3 nights prior, Cornelius Pemberton had cornered her in the library, his wine-soaked breath hot against her neck, his hands grasping at her waist. She had pushed him away with enough force to send him stumbling into a side table, and his mother had heard the crash. The son's honor must be protected. The paid companion was expendable. "I understand, ma'am." Eleanor curtsied with the grace that years of genteel poverty had ingrained in her, though her knees trembled. She turned toward the door, her spine straight, her eyes dry. She would not give Mrs. Pemberton the satisfaction of tears. An hour later, Eleanor stood outside the tavern in Thornbury's modest village square, her single trunk at her feet. The autumn wind bit through her thin pelisse, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the distant promise of rain. Mrs. Martha Brennan, the tavern's proprietress, emerged wiping her hands on her apron. Her weathered face softened with sympathy. "I heard about the Pembertons, dear. Wicked business, that." She paused, her eyes assessing. "I've need of help in the kitchen and serving rooms, if you're willing. It's honest work, though perhaps not what you're accustomed to." Eleanor's throat tightened with gratitude and despair in equal measure. Kitchen work would mark her as truly fallen in society's eyes. But what choice remained? "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan. I am grateful for your kindness. You can sleep in the small room above the kitchen. It's drafty, but clean." Mrs. Brennan's expression turned grim. "Though I'll warn you plain, men in their cups can be forward. You'll need to manage them firmly." The implication hung heavy in the autumn air. Eleanor would be vulnerable, unprotected, fair game for any man who decided a woman serving ale must be available for other services as well. She thought of Cornelius Pemberton's grasping hands, multiplied by a tavern full of strangers, and felt something inside her crack. "I understand," she whispered, though she wanted to scream. That evening, as the tavern filled with laborers and merchants seeking warmth and drink, Eleanor escaped to the only sanctuary she knew, the small stone church at the edge of the village. The church was empty and cold, but its silence felt like mercy. Eleanor sank onto a pew, her hands folded in her lap, and stared at the simple altar. She had no prayers left to offer. God, it seemed, had made his opinion of her quite clear. "Forgive me," a male voice said softly from the shadows near the vestry door. "I did not mean to intrude on your solitude." Eleanor startled, turning to see a man emerging from the dimness. He was tall and lean, dressed in plain brown wool that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly overlong, and his hands, currently holding a cleaning cloth, were strong and capable. She judged him to be near 30, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the weariness etched around his eyes. "You're not intruding," she managed, embarrassed to be caught in her moment of despair. "I should not have presumed the church empty." "The church belongs to all who need it." He set down the cloth and approached slowly, as one might approach a wounded creature. I am Thomas Garrett. I assist Reverend Dobbs here. A vicar's assistant, then. Or perhaps merely a servant who cleaned the pews and tended the grounds. His clothing suggested poverty, his bearing something else entirely, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his station. Eleanor Hartley, she offered, seeing no point in clinging to her former title of Miss. You seem troubled, Miss Hartley. His voice was gentle, but he made no move to sit beside her, respecting the space between them. I am without prospects, she said, surprised by her own honesty. Perhaps the day's humiliations had burned away her capacity for pretense. But that is not your burden to bear. Thomas Garrett studied her with eyes the color of smoke, gray and searching. The world is often cruel to those who deserve kindness most, he said quietly. I hope your circumstances improve, Miss Hartley. He bowed slightly and withdrew, leaving Eleanor alone with her despair and the curious warmth of having been seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. 2 days later, Eleanor was scrubbing pots in the tavern's steaming kitchen when Mrs. Brennan appeared with Reverend Dobbs in tow. The elderly clergyman's expression was grave, but not unkind. Miss Hartley, might we speak privately? He asked. They retreated to the small office behind the main room, where the Reverend gestured for Eleanor to sit. She remained standing, her wet hands clasped before her apron. I shall be direct, as the situation requires it, Reverend Dobbs began. My young assistant, Thomas Garrett, finds himself in need of a wife. Quickly. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon? There are family complications, matters I am not at liberty to discuss in detail. The Reverend's lined face showed discomfort with the necessary discretion. Mr. Garrett is a good man, devout and honorable. He requires a respectable wife to resolve certain obligations. He has authorized me to propose a marriage of convenience. The words seemed to come from very far away. Marriage? He would offer you protection, a modest home, and the respectability of his name. In return, you would provide him with the social standing that marriage affords. Reverend Dobbs leaned forward earnestly. I understand this is highly irregular, Miss Hartley, but I have observed you these past years. You are a woman of character and dignity, and Mr. Garrett is in genuine need. Eleanor's mind reeled. Marriage to a poor vicar's assistant would mean continued poverty, but also safety, security, a place in the world, however humble. What does Mr. Garrett expect from this arrangement? She asked carefully. Respectability and discretion. Nothing more. The Reverend's meaning was clear. This would be a marriage in name only. Eleanor looked down at her reddened hands, marked already by 2 days of rough work. She thought of the men downstairs, their eyes following her movements with increasing boldness. She thought of Cornelius Pemberton and all the men like him who saw women without protection as prey. I accept, she said quietly. The wedding took place 3 days later in the same small church where Eleanor had first encountered Thomas Garrett. Reverend Dobbs performed the ceremony with Mrs. Brennan serving as witness. Eleanor wore her best dress, a faded blue muslin that had been her mother's, and carried a small posy of late autumn wildflowers that Mrs. Brennan had pressed into her hands. Thomas stood before the altar in his threadbare coat, his expression solemn and unreadable. When Reverend Dobbs instructed him to take Eleanor's hand, his fingers closed around hers with unexpected gentleness, as though she were something precious rather than a desperate woman accepting a pragmatic arrangement. I, Thomas Garrett, take thee, Eleanor Hartley, to be my wedded wife, he said clearly, his gray eyes steady on hers, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Eleanor repeated the vows in a voice that trembled only slightly, acutely aware that she was promising to love a man she barely knew. A man who needed her for reasons he had not explained. When Reverend Dobbs pronounced them man and wife, Thomas lifted Eleanor's hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was formal, but his eyes held something that made her breath catch, a tenderness that seemed genuine, impossible as that was. "Mrs. Garrett," he said softly, and Eleanor heard in those two words both a promise and a question. They walked from the church into the pale autumn sunlight, and Eleanor felt the strangest sensation, as though she had just stepped through a doorway into a life she could not yet comprehend, with a man who was far more than he appeared to be. The cottage stood at the edge of Thornbury, nestled against a copse of beech trees whose leaves burned gold and crimson in the afternoon light. It was small but well maintained, with a thatched roof and a garden that had been tended with care. Eleanor stared at it, surprised. "This is yours?" she asked as Thomas opened the gate. "Ours," he corrected gently. "It belonged to someone who no longer has use for it. We may live here as long as we need." The interior revealed more surprises. The furnishings were simple but of good quality. A solid oak table, comfortable chairs before the hearth, shelves lined with more books than any poor vicar's assistant should possess. Eleanor ran her fingers along the leather spines, reading titles in Latin, Greek, and French. "You have an impressive library, Mr. Garrett." "Thomas," he said from the doorway. "We are married now, Eleanor. I would have you use my Christian name." She turned to find him watching her with that same intent expression he had worn in the church. "Thomas, then, and you must call me Eleanor." He nodded slowly. "I have prepared the larger bedchamber for you. I will take the smaller room at the back of the house. You need not fear any intrusion upon your privacy." Heat crept into Eleanor's cheeks. "I appreciate your consideration. I want you to feel safe here." He moved closer and she caught the scent of him, clean linen and something else, like cedar and autumn wind. "This arrangement may have been born of necessity, but I would not have you feel trapped." The kindness in his voice made her throat tighten. When had anyone last cared for her comfort? "Thank you, Thomas." The days settled into a rhythm both strange and unexpectedly peaceful. Thomas rose early to assist Reverend Dobbs at the church, though Eleanor noted he spent more time in the cottage's small study than at the vicarage. She maintained their home, cooked their simple meals, and tried not to wonder about the contradictions that surrounded her husband. He read philosophy in the original Greek. His penmanship, glimpsed on letters he wrote and quickly folded away, was elegant and educated. He rode the elderly gelding they kept in the small stable with the natural seat of a gentleman who had spent years in the saddle. And sometimes, when he thought himself unobserved, his bearing shifted, his shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and he looked like something far removed from a humble assistant to a country vicar. But he was unfailingly kind to her. He brought her books from his collection, seeming to divine her tastes without asking. He insisted she take the comfortable chair by the fire each evening. He never raised his voice, never made demands, never looked at her with anything but careful respect. It was maddening, and increasingly, it was intoxicating. One evening in their second week of marriage, Eleanor sat by the fire reading while Thomas worked at his correspondence. The domesticity of the scene struck her with unexpected force. This was what marriage could be, she realized. Two people existing together in quiet companionship, each engaged in their own pursuits but somehow connected by the shared space between them. "You are thoughtful tonight," Thomas observed, setting down his pen. "I was merely thinking how peaceful this is." She closed her book. "I have not known much peace in recent years." His expression softened with sympathy. "The Pembertons were unkind to you." "Mrs. Pemberton was exacting. Her son was Eleanor faltered, old shame rising. You need not speak of it if it pains you. Thomas rose and crossed to the fire, kneeling to add another log. The gesture brought him closer to Eleanor's chair, and she found herself studying the line of his profile, the strength in his hands, the way firelight caught in his dark hair. He presumed I was available for his amusement, she said quietly. When I refused him, his mother dismissed me without references. I suspect she knew the truth, but could not afford to acknowledge it. Thomas's jaw tightened. Men like that believe their position grants them license to take what they wish. They are contemptible. The vehemence in his voice surprised her. You speak as though you have known such men. I have seen enough of society to understand its corruptions. He turned to look at her, still kneeling by her chair, and their faces were suddenly very close. You deserved better, Eleanor. You deserve better than this arrangement I have thrust upon you. You offered me safety when I had none, she said softly. That is no small thing. Something shifted in his eyes. A hunger quickly banked. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone grateful but resentful. Someone who would keep to her room and count the days until she might escape. His voice dropped lower. Not someone who arranges wildflowers in cracked vases and hums while she cooks. Not someone who reads Euripides in translation and argues with the author's conclusions. Not someone who makes this cottage feel like... Like what? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Like home. He finished, and rose abruptly, putting distance between them. Forgive me. I have overstepped. But Eleanor did not want him to step back. She wanted him to step closer, to finish what his eyes had begun. The realization shook her. She was developing feelings for this mysterious man who was her husband in name, but nothing more. The following afternoon, Eleanor walked to the village to purchase thread. On her return, she encountered young Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's daughter, struggling with a basket of laundry while minding her 3 younger siblings. The girl was perhaps 14, her face drawn with exhaustion. Mrs. Garrett, Sarah corrected herself, bobbing an awkward curtsy. Begging your pardon, but might you watch the little ones for just a moment? Mother's taken ill, and I must get this washing to Mrs. Cooper before dark. Eleanor did not hesitate. She spent the next 2 hours entertaining the Miller children with stories while Sarah completed her errands. When Thomas found her there, sitting on a fence with a grubby child on each knee and another plaiting her hair, his expression arrested her. Eleanor? He approached slowly, as though afraid to disturb the scene. Sarah needed help. Her mother is ill. Eleanor gently disentangled herself from the children and stood, brushing at her skirts. I hope you do not mind the delay in supper. I do not mind. His voice was strange, tight with some emotion she could not name. You are remarkable, do you know that? I merely did what anyone would do. No. He took her hand, the first time he had touched her since their wedding, and held it carefully in both of his. Most would have walked past. You see people, Eleanor. You see their need and answer it without thought for yourself. It is. He seemed to struggle for words. It is one of the most beautiful things I have ever witnessed. Heat flooded Eleanor's face. Thomas. Forgive me, he said again, but he did not release her hand. I am not skilled at expressing. I merely wished you to know that I see you as well, and what I see humbles me. They walked home in charged silence, his hand occasionally brushing hers, each touch sending sparks through Eleanor's skin. That night, she lay in her solitary bed and acknowledged the truth. She was falling in love with her husband. The man she had married out of desperation was becoming essential to her happiness, and she had no idea how to bridge the careful distance he maintained between them. The following week brought rain, Cold, relentless autumn storms that turned the roads to mud and kept Eleanor confined to the cottage. On the third day, she woke with her head aching and her throat raw. By afternoon, fever had taken hold. She tried to hide it, but Thomas noticed immediately when she swayed while preparing their evening meal. He caught her before she fell, lifting her easily in his arms. "You are burning with fever," he said, carrying her toward her bedchamber. "Why did you not tell me you were ill?" "I did not wish to trouble you." Her voice came out as a croak. "Eleanor." He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that made tears prick her eyes. "You are my wife. Your well-being is not a trouble. It is my foremost concern." He cared for her through the night with a devotion that pierced her fever-addled consciousness. Cool cloths on her forehead, water pressed to her cracked lips, his hand stroking her hair when nightmares made her cry out. At some point, she became aware of his voice, low and fervent, speaking words that made no sense. "You are safe, darling. You are mine to protect, mine to cherish. My Duchess, my true Duchess. I will not let you go." Duchess? The word floated through her fevered mind like a strange dream. But his hand was real, solid and warm around hers, and she clung to it as though it were her anchor to the living world. By morning, the fever had broken. Eleanor woke to find Thomas asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head pillowed on his arms at the mattress's edge, his hand still clasping hers. In sleep, his face had lost its careful control, revealing exhaustion and something else, a depth of feeling that made her breath catch. She studied him in the gray morning light, this man who had married her for unknown reasons, and then proceeded to treat her like something infinitely valuable. Who was Thomas Garrett truly? And why did a vicar's assistant speak in his sleep of duchesses? When he woke and found her watching him, relief flooded his features. "Thank God. The fever has passed. You stayed with me all night. Where else would I be?" He brushed a damp tendril of hair from her forehead, his touch lingering. "You frightened me, Eleanor. When you cried out in your sleep, when you burned so hot, I feared—" His voice cracked. "I am well now," she assured him, deeply moved by his distress. "Thanks to your care. I could not bear to lose you." The words emerged raw and unguarded. "I know I have no right to such feelings, that our arrangement was never meant to include attachment, but I—" Eleanor reached up and touched his face, silencing him. "Thomas, what are we doing?" "I do not know," he admitted, turning his cheek into her palm. "But I can no longer pretend indifference." The days following her illness shifted something fundamental between them. Thomas courted her. There was no other word for it. He brought her wildflowers from his morning rides. He read to her in the evenings, their chairs drawn close together. He found excuses to touch her, a hand at her elbow, fingers brushing as he passed her a book, his palm at the small of her back when they walked. And Eleanor, who had armored herself in pragmatism and low expectations, found her defenses crumbling beneath his steady attention. One evening, they walked along the lane at sunset, the sky painted in shades of amber and rose. Thomas stopped beneath an oak tree whose branches created a canopy of gold leaves overhead. "Eleanor," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I can no longer maintain this fiction that ours is merely a marriage of convenience. The truth is that I—" "Yes?" Her heart hammered wildly. "I am profoundly, irrevocably in love with you." The confession emerged with quiet intensity. "I know I have no right to speak of love when I have been less than honest about my circumstances, when there are things I have not yet explained. But I can no longer carry this feeling in silence." Joy and fear warred in Eleanor's chest. "What things have you not explained?" "Soon," he promised. "I will tell you everything soon. But first, I need you to know this. The man I am with you. The man who brings you flowers and argues with you about Euripides and holds your hand when you are frightened. That man is real. That man is more true than I have been in all my life. And that man loves you beyond reason. Eleanor searched his face, seeing sincerity and anguish in equal measure. Whatever secrets he carried, whatever his reasons for obscurity, she believed his love was genuine. "I love you too," she whispered. His eyes closed briefly, as though her words had struck him with physical force. When he opened them again, they blazed with feeling. "May I kiss you?" She nodded, breathless, and he pulled her close. The kiss was everything she had imagined in her secret heart, tender and hungry, reverent and desperate. His hands cradled her face as though she were infinitely precious, and Eleanor melted against him, opening to the kiss with her whole being. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Thomas pressed his forehead to hers. "You are my salvation, Eleanor Garrett. Whatever comes, remember that. Whatever comes." Unease stirred in her chest. "Thomas, what do you mean?" "I must go to London tomorrow." His voice was heavy with regret. "There are matters I can no longer delay, but I will return to you, I swear it. And when I do, I will explain everything. You are frightening me. Do not be frightened." He kissed her again, softly. "I am your husband, and I love you, and nothing will change that. Trust me for just a few days more." Eleanor wanted to protest, to demand answers immediately, but the plea in his eyes stopped her. "I trust you," she said, and prayed she was not being foolish. He left at dawn the next morning. Eleanor watched from the cottage doorway as he rode away, and despite his promises, dread settled in her chest like a stone. Lady Beatrice Carmichael arrived in Thornbury on a grey autumn morning, 3 days after Thomas's departure. Eleanor first became aware of her presence when Mrs. Brennan burst into the cottage, her face flushed with alarm. "Mrs. Garrett, Eleanor, there's a grand lady in a ducal carriage asking after you. She's brought lawyers with her, and half the village is gathered in the square gawking." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. A ducal carriage? She followed Mrs. Brennan to the village square, dread mounting with each step. A magnificent carriage bearing a coat of arms stood before the church, and beside it posed a woman of extraordinary beauty, golden-haired, exquisitely dressed, and radiating aristocratic fury. "You must be the infamous Miss Hartley," Lady Beatrice said, her voice carrying across the square. "Or should I say, the presumptuous Mrs. Garrett?" Eleanor stopped, acutely aware of every villager watching the scene unfold. "I am Eleanor Garrett, yes." "How delightfully provincial." Lady Beatrice's smile was a blade. "I am Lady Beatrice Carmichael, daughter of the Marquis of Thornwood. More relevantly, I am the betrothed of His Grace, Alexander Thomas Garrett, Duke of Ashford." She paused for effect. "The man you claim as your husband." The words struck Eleanor like physical blows. Duke! Alexander! The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The expensive books, the educated manner, the way he had spoken of duchesses in fever dreams. Thomas was not a vicar's assistant. He was one of the most powerful men in England. "I see comprehension dawning," Lady Beatrice continued, clearly relishing Eleanor's shock. "Did your husband neglect to mention his true identity? How unfortunate. Our betrothal was announced at the beginning of the season. When Alexander disappeared, it caused quite the scandal. Now I understand why. He was playing at poverty with a desperate nobody." Eleanor swayed, and Mrs. Brennan steadied her with a firm hand. "Now, see here, my lady. I have brought lawyers to begin annulment proceedings." Lady Beatrice spoke over her. "This mockery of a marriage is invalid. Alexander was coerced by his estate's requirements to marry, And he chose the path of least resistance. A nobody who could be easily set aside once he'd satisfied the legal requirements. That's a lie. Reverend Dobbs emerged from the church, his elderly face fierce. His Grace married Miss Hartley of his own free will, with full knowledge and consent. Did he inform her of his identity? Lady Beatrice challenged. Did she consent to marry Alexander Garrett, Duke of Ashford? Or did she consent to marry Thomas Garrett, supposed pauper? The deception invalidates any contract. Eleanor found her voice, though it emerged hollow. Where is Thomas, his Grace? In London, meeting with his solicitors. He sent me ahead to manage this situation. Lady Beatrice's expression turned almost pitying. My dear, surely you cannot believe he actually cares for you. You were convenient, nothing more. The words burrowed into Eleanor's heart like poisoned thorns. She thought of Thomas's careful courtship, his declarations of love, his promises. Had it all been performance? The aristocrat amusing himself by playing at domestic simplicity with a naive woman too desperate to question her good fortune. I need to go, Eleanor whispered, turning blindly away. She fled to the church, that sanctuary where she had first met the man she now knew she had never truly known at all. She sank onto a pew and let the tears come. Tears of humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak so profound she thought it might tear her apart. Reverend Dobbs found her there an hour later. He sat beside her, his weathered hand patting hers awkwardly. His Grace loves you, child. I have known him since he was a boy, and I have never seen him as he is with you, truly himself, unguarded and whole. He lied to me. Eleanor's voice was raw. Every moment we shared was built on deception. He concealed his identity, yes, but everything else was true. The Reverend leaned forward earnestly. Alexander's mother was forced into her marriage. She died young, made miserable by duty and obligation. He swore he would never condemn another woman to that fate, never marry for anything less than genuine affection. When his trustees demanded he wed to satisfy estate requirements, he fled rather than trap Lady Beatrice in a loveless union. So he trapped me instead, Eleanor said bitterly. He offered you honesty about the nature of the arrangement. A marriage of convenience, nothing more demanded. But then he came to love you, Eleanor. Truly and deeply. He delayed returning to London, delayed facing the consequences of his flight, because he could not bear to leave you. And when he did leave, it was to fight for your marriage, not to end it. Eleanor shook her head, unable to absorb his words through the pain. The church door crashed open. Thomas, Alexander, stood silhouetted in the entrance, his fine London clothing marking him unmistakably as the aristocrat he was. He saw Eleanor and strode down the aisle, his face etched with desperate urgency. Eleanor, please, don't. She stood, putting the pew between them like a barricade. Your Grace. He flinched at the title. It is still Thomas. I am still the man who loves you. Are you? Her voice shook. How can I know what is real? You lied from the moment we met. I concealed my identity, he corrected, stepping closer though she retreated. Everything else was truth. My feelings, my promises, You made me fall in love with someone who does not exist. The words burst from her like a dam breaking. Thomas Garrett, the kind vicar's assistant who read philosophy and brought me wildflowers. He was a fiction. A role you played. No? Alexander rounded the pew, closing the distance despite her attempts to maintain it. That man is me. More authentically me than I have ever been as Alexander Garrett, Duke of Ashford. With you, I could be simply a man. A man who fell profoundly in love with his extraordinary wife. I am not your wife. Lady Beatrice made that abundantly clear. Lady Beatrice is wrong. He captured Eleanor's shoulders gently, his gray eyes blazing with intensity. You are my wife in every way that matters. Before God and law, we are bound. I will fight her annulment with every resource at my disposal. Eleanor searched his face, wanting desperately to believe him. Why did you not tell me the truth? Because I am a coward. The admission came heavily. I knew that the moment you learned my identity, everything would change. You would see the Duke instead of the man. I would lose the only honest connection I have ever known. So I delayed, telling myself I would explain soon, always soon, until events forced my hand. What do you want from me, Alexander? She used his true name deliberately, saw him wince again. I want you to come to London with me, to face society as my Duchess, to allow me to show the world that you are my choice, my partner, my love. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly familiar despite everything. I know I have wounded you. I know I have destroyed your trust, but I am begging you to give me the chance to rebuild it. And if I refuse? Pain flashed across his features. Then I will provide you with a generous settlement and set you free. I will not trap you in a marriage you no longer want, even if losing you destroys me. His voice dropped to a whisper. But please, Eleanor, please do not give up on us. The man who held your hand through fever, who kissed you beneath the oak tree, who swore his love. That man is real, and he is standing before you now, terrified of losing the only woman he has ever truly loved. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his hands on her face, the truth in his voice battling against her hurt and anger. She thought of the past weeks, of the man who had been unfailingly gentle, who had seen her when she had felt invisible, who had made her feel valued for herself rather than despite herself. Had that been a lie? Or had she glimpsed the truth of him beneath the titles and deception? I need time, she said finally, opening her eyes. I need to understand who you really are when you are not pretending to be poor. I need to see you in your world before I can decide if I belong in it. Then come to London with me, he urged. Let me show you. Let me prove that the man you fell in love with is not a fiction. She looked at him for a long moment. This stranger who was her husband. This duke who had scrubbed church floors and brought her wildflowers and held her through fever. And despite everything, despite the hurt and betrayal, she found she could not simply walk away. Very well, she said quietly. I will come to London. The relief that flooded his face was so profound that Eleanor felt her anger crack just slightly. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though afraid she might disappear. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for giving me this chance. I will not waste it. Eleanor did not return the embrace, but neither did she pull away. She let herself be held, gathering strength for whatever came next. 3 days later, they entered the ballroom of Lady Beatrice's family estate for the autumn ball. Eleanor, dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that Alexander had commissioned for her, felt every eye in the room turn toward them. The whispers rose like a tide. Lady Beatrice swept forward, resplendent in gold, her smile poisonous. Your Grace, how kind of you to attend. And you brought your companion. I brought my wife, Alexander corrected, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. His hand tightened on Eleanor's. Lady Beatrice, Society, allow me to formally present Her Grace, Eleanor Garrett, Duchess of Ashford. The whispers exploded into shocked murmurs. Lady Beatrice's composure cracked. This farce has gone far enough, Alexander. You married her under false pretenses. The annulment? There will be no annulment. Alexander's voice rang with authority, and Eleanor glimpsed for the first time the man who commanded estates and power. Eleanor is my lawfully wedded wife. We married with full consent before God and witnesses. Our union is legitimate and will remain so. She is a nobody. Lady Beatrice's voice rose, her careful aristocratic veneer shattering. A paid companion with no family, no fortune, no connections. You have disgraced yourself and humiliated me for someone utterly beneath you. No. Eleanor found her own voice, years of silent endurance giving way to something harder and brighter. I am a woman who married a man she believed to be honorable, a man who, despite his deceptions, showed me more genuine respect and kindness than anyone in my life. If his grace is disgraced by that, perhaps the problem lies with your society's values, not with my origins. A shocked silence greeted her words. Then Alexander stepped forward, positioning himself beside Eleanor rather than in front of her, partners, not protector, and protected. Lady Beatrice, you deserve honesty, and I failed to provide it, he said, his voice steady. I could not marry you knowing my heart was not engaged. You deserve a husband who loves you, not one fulfilling an obligation. Eleanor showed me what genuine connection feels like. She married me when she believed I had nothing but myself to offer. That is worth more than all the strategic alliances in England. You would throw away everything for her? Lady Beatrice's voice shook with disbelief and wounded pride. Your reputation, your standing, your duty to your family name? If necessary, yes. Alexander turned to face the assembled crowd, his hand still firmly clasping Eleanor's. I am prepared to renounce my title and estates if that is what it takes to remain married to Eleanor. She is worth more to me than any dukedom. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Eleanor's heart stopped. Alexander, no. I mean it, he said quietly, looking down at her. I will not lose you. Not to society's censure, not to legal machinations, not to anything. You are my choice, freely made. You are my wife, and I will spend my life proving myself worthy of you. Eleanor stared at him, seeing past the Duke to the man who had knelt beside her chair, who had held her through fever, who had kissed her beneath autumn leaves. And she realized that this man, this complicated, flawed, sincere man, was who he had always been. The title was merely window dressing. You do not need to renounce anything, she said firmly. I married you, Alexander. All of you. Even the parts I did not yet know. And if your world cannot accept that, then we will make our own. Something shifted in the ballroom's atmosphere. An elderly Duchess Eleanor did not recognize stepped forward, her jewels glittering in the candlelight. Well said, Your Grace. The woman addressed Eleanor directly. I am the Duchess of Marlborough. I remember when love matches were scandalous. Now half the ton pursues them. She turned to the crowd. The Duke of Ashford has married for affection rather than alliance. I see nothing disgraceful in that, rather the opposite. A man of character putting genuine feeling above social convenience. Another voice joined hers, then another. Not everyone. Eleanor could see plenty of disapproving faces, could hear continued whispers, but enough. Enough that Lady Beatrice's certainty faltered, her supporters looking less convinced. This is not over, Lady Beatrice said coldly, but her voice lacked its earlier command. She swept from the ballroom, her golden gown trailing behind her like a banner of defeat. Alexander pulled Eleanor closer. Are you all right? I am furious with you, she said honestly. And hurt and confused and uncertain about nearly everything. I know, I am sorry. But I also love you. The admission escaped before she could stop it. Heaven help me, I love the impossible, infuriating man you are. Both the Duke and the vicar's assistant, because they are the same person. His eyes closed briefly with relief and gratitude. I will spend the rest of my life earning your forgiveness. You may begin, Eleanor said, by dancing with your wife. He led her to the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. Dancing with Alexander was different from the careful distances they had maintained in the cottage. He held her with confidence, moved with practiced grace, and Eleanor realized this was yet another facet of the man she had married. Not a contradiction, but a completion. "What happens now?" she asked as they turned across the polished floor. "We go home to London. I introduce you properly to society. We attend tedious dinners and navigate politics, and I bore you with estate business." He smiled down at her. "And when we tire of it all, we retreat to a small cottage in Thornbury, where I can be simply Thomas, and you can be simply Eleanor, and we can remember what brought us together." A cottage and a dukedom, Eleanor mused. What an absurd combination. No more absurd than a duke cleaning church pews and a paid companion becoming a duchess. His expression turned serious. "I meant what I said, Eleanor. If you truly cannot bear this life, I will walk away from it. You matter more." Eleanor considered the man before her. Flawed and secretive, yes, but also kind and devoted and willing to sacrifice everything for her happiness. She thought of the weeks in the cottage, the peace she had found in his presence, the way he had made her feel seen and valued for the first time in her life. "I do not want you to walk away from who you are," she said finally. "I want you to be both men, the Duke and the simple man who brings me wildflowers. Can you do that? With you beside me, I can be anything." He pulled her slightly closer. Propriety be damned. "I love you, Eleanor Garrett. Duchess or pauper's wife, you are my true partner. Then we shall navigate this absurd life together," Eleanor decided. "Though I warn you, I intend to be a most unconventional Duchess. I will likely befriend all the wrong people and say inappropriate things at dinner parties." "I am counting on it," Alexander said, and kissed her right there on the dance floor. Scandal be damned. The days that followed were not easy. Eleanor faced scrutiny, criticism, and barely concealed hostility from portions of society who found her elevation offensive. But she also found unexpected allies. Other women who had married for love, reformers who valued character over birth, and even some aristocrats who admired her directness. Alexander kept his promises. He was patient with her lingering hurt, transparent about his business and his past, and unfailingly devoted. He taught her to navigate society's complexities while encouraging her to maintain her own principles. And when the pressure became too much, they would slip away to Thornbury, to the small cottage where they had first learned to love each other. 6 months after that fateful ball, Eleanor stood in the cottage garden, planting spring bulbs while Alexander repaired a section of fence. They had spent the week there, away from London's demands, and Eleanor felt herself breathing properly for the first time in months. "Do you regret it?" Alexander asked suddenly, looking up from his work. "Taking on all of this, the title, the scrutiny, the complications?" Eleanor straightened, brushing dirt from her hands, and studied her husband. He wore plain working clothes, his hair disheveled by wind, his hands dirty from honest labor. He looked nothing like a duke, and everything like the man she had fallen in love with. "I regret that you lied to me," she said honestly. "That pain will take time to fully heal." He nodded, accepting the truth of it. "But I do not regret marrying you," Eleanor continued. "Either time, in that small church when I thought you were Thomas Garrett, or every day since when I choose to remain Eleanor Garrett, Duchess and wife to an impossible man." Alexander crossed the garden and pulled her into his arms, heedless of the dirt on both of them. "I will spend my life being worthy of that choice." "See that you do," Eleanor said, and kissed him with all the love and exasperation and hope she carried. That evening, they sat before the cottage fire, Eleanor reading while Alexander worked on correspondence. The scene was nearly identical to those early days of their marriage, but everything had changed. Now Eleanor knew all of Alexander's secrets. Now he had proven his devotion through action as well as words. Now they faced their complicated life as true partners, choosing each other daily despite the obstacles. "Thomas?" Eleanor said, using the name deliberately. He looked up, smiling at her use of it. "Yes?" "I am glad I married you. Both of you. I am the luckiest of men," he said quietly, "to have found love in a small village church with a remarkable woman who saw past everything to the man I wished to be." Eleanor set down her book and crossed to sit on the mau arm of his chair. "And I," she said, "am learning that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest of weddings and the most complicated of men." He pulled her into his lap, and she went willingly, settling against his chest as firelight danced around them. Outside, spring rain began to fall, but inside the cottage, their cottage, always their cottage no matter what titles they carried, Eleanor Garrett felt something she had never expected to find. She felt home. She felt seen. She felt loved. And in the arms of the man who was both duke and commoner, both stranger and husband, she felt finally, completely, joyfully herself.